And it's really sad because I did think after recording the last episode that last Thursday, I thought there was some real movement that might get us Big Ten football back on the field sooner rather than later. The first big thing was that in Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor, the lady I call Cruella de Vil, she came out and reversed an ordinance that did not allow high school football in the state of Michigan. I've been over all this. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But when you look at the Big Ten footprint, Ohio's playing high school football. Pennsylvania's playing high school football. Indiana has Notre Dame playing college football in their footprint. Iowa State in the Big 12 is playing in the Big Ten footprint. And so Michigan was really the big state, the battleground, if you will, where the line had been drawn in the sand and where the governor said, no, we don't want college football. We don't want high school football. She was the woman that actually came out a few weeks ago and said that she was proud of the Big Ten for canceling football and taking a stand against putting athletics ahead of the health and safety of its players, which was nonsense. But the fact that she reversed course on this, I thought was a great sign for Big Ten football, because to me it felt like, okay, Michigan remains the biggest hurdle, the biggest battleground state, and if she's not going to block high school football, I don't believe that she will block college football as well, and maybe this thing will get close. Also on Thursday, we got that news out of the Pac-12 where there is going to be instant testing for people who did not see this story. And if you listen to this podcast, you care about college football, so I'm guessing you did see the story. But the Pac-12 basically has said that they hope by the end of September to have basically an instant test. You can test daily. It's cheap. You get the results in 15 minutes. And then you can safely practice, you can safely let kids in the facility knowing that no one is positive. And if someone is positive, you, of course, quarantine them and move on. So those were two things that I thought were really, really good. And even as it pertains to the Pac-12 thing, I didn't think it necessarily was going to impact the Pac-12 because they, of course, are in a different deal than the Big Ten. I've said it many times. The Pac-12 has several programs that aren't even on campus right now. It has several teams that are not on campus right now. And even the teams on campus, like USC, like UCLA, they can't get into the facility. So while I didn't think this Pac-12 testing could help the Pac-12, it did seem like a good sign for the Big Ten, because the Big Ten, their biggest issue this whole time has been about how quickly they could test, how often they could test, and now that does not appear to be a hurdle, or it will not be within the month if everything goes to plan according to the Pac-12. So that was the good news. Unfortunately, there was some bad news too, and unfortunately, like I said, there was no real movement. As I record here about 6 o'clock Eastern time on Monday, we still don't know if or when Big Ten football will be back, and the latest hurdle appears to be your boy, Mark Schlissel. You guys know who Mark Schlissel is? He sounds like a you-know-what, a nerd. Well, he kind of is. He is the president of the University of Michigan. And there were multiple reports over the course of this weekend that Mark Schlissel, the president of Michigan, is the guy that is holding up this whole process for the Big Ten. He is a guy that is very much fighting behind the scenes. He does not believe college football should happen. And a report from Sports Illustrated even went so far as to say, even if the rest of the Big Ten approves college football, or if a handful of schools approve football in October, he may still hold out Michigan, even while a school like Ohio State or Penn State or Iowa or Nebraska would be playing. And so those are the reports, those are the rumors, and I'll tell you this. If you've been listening to this podcast, you should not be surprised. I've talked a lot about what is going on in Michigan. I just talked about Gretchen Whitmer, Cruella de Vil, who up until about a week ago refused to have high school football in her state and applauded the Big Ten for canceling college football. But if you listen to this podcast, and I know you guys do, and I appreciate your support, Mark Schlissel is another guy who is one of the big roadblocks, and he has been for a while. This is not new news. We should not be surprised by this, because if you've been listening to this show, we can go all the way back to May when Mark Schlissel came out and basically said, look, if we can't have students on campus, then we're not playing football. and really has been one of the outspoken guys about having fans in the stands. And early on in this process, April, May, June, was really one of the big voices saying, like, there's no way we can have college football. And it's funny, right? Like, you remember those days. Remember, like, mid-May, late April, when we had all these people every week? It felt like one school president, one governor was saying, we're not going to be able to do college football. We're not going to be able to have fans in the stands. And we would all collectively, as a group of fans in college sports, say, wait a second now. It's May 11th. It's April 28th. Why are we trying to put our foot down and say what we will or will not be able to do in September? Mark Schlissel was one of those guys that was constantly making headlines in April, in May, for his negativity and for his belief that college football probably would not be safe to happen, and certainly would not be safe to happen if there were fans in the stands. It is worth mentioning he has a background in infectious disease, and he is a guy that very much has made his career in that field. And so, listen, on the one hand, I will say he is a guy whose voice did carry weight with those Big Ten school presidents. If you read up on all this stuff, it appears as though he was one of the most vocal people against Big Ten football, but also one of the most well-respected people in the room because of his background. The counterpoint is, pretty much everything, every negative reason to not play college football has been proven to be false. Remember, when the Big Ten canceled college football, they were afraid, hey, what happens when players start tackling and blocking? There's going to be an increase in infections. What happens when students come back? There's going to be an increase in infections. What happens when teams travel? There's going to be an increase in infections. And so far, we have not seen that. Central Arkansas and Austin Peay played the first game of the season. Both teams traveled to Alabama to play. They had a combined 0 tests both before the game and after the game. Michigan, by the way, how about the University of Michigan, this place that Mark Schlissel calls home, his kingdom, his fiefdom? They announced last week that not a single player tested positive in the entire program in the month of August. We are not seeing case increases. Now, look, we are seeing moments here and there. Tennessee had to cancel a scrimmage on Saturday because 8 or 9 players caught it, and because of contact tracing, about 40 players were held out for precaution. We saw TCU did have to cancel their game against SMU, but for the most part, this is successful. And by the way, we never said it was going to be 100% successful. No one ever said there was never going to be positive cases. But if you look across college football, it's mostly been successful. Central Arkansas has not only played once, they've played twice. Small schools that we thought were going to struggle to keep athletes healthy because they didn't have the resources of the ACC, SEC, and Big 12 are successful. South Alabama, Southern Miss, UAB, Central Arkansas, Austin Peay, they all played this weekend. So while Schlissel, the president of Michigan, he does have respect in the room, and he should have respect in the room because of his background, a lot of what he said has been proven to be false. And by the way, that's okay. Experts get stuff wrong all the time. It's why when you have an injury medically, you go get a second opinion, a third opinion, because sometimes doctors are wrong. And I think it's pretty indisputable that at this point, Schlissel has been wrong on this. It's ironic that all of this happened over the last couple days, that Mark Schlissel has emerged as a guy that appears to be holding up the Big Ten, because it's also worth noting that there was a protest on Michigan's campus with the players, with the parents, with the fans, and of course with the coaches on Saturday. And I will add this. I give Jim Harbaugh a ton of credit. If you follow me on Twitter at Aaron_Torres, I shared this story, but it is worth noting that Jim Harbaugh not only marched with his players, but I think said one of the most important things that has been said so far in terms of getting Big Ten football back sooner rather than later. Jim Harbaugh was asked, I shared this video, he was asked how soon you would need to be ready to play football. And he said, us? He goes, we've been going at it since June. We've had our kids back on campus since June. We would be ready to play in 2 weeks. Jim Harbaugh said, we will be ready to play in 2 weeks, okay? And so when I look at this situation, I'm sorry. I give Jim Harbaugh so much credit. This guy that gets so much criticism, he has been one of the most outspoken people against the Big Ten, against his own governor, against his own school president, saying, you guys are wrong. We can play college football. And by the way, we have the facts to back it up. 0 positive tests the entire month of August. That matters. That should be considered when making these decisions. I give him credit. Scott Frost is another one who has been very outspoken about this, but I thought that was such an important moment in time for college football and for specifically the Big Ten, right? Because you get all these leaked reports. Certain reporters are telling you that this school can't do this and that school can't do that. And, well, Jim Harbaugh just came out and said, we could be ready to go in 2 weeks. Do not let us be the reason that you think you need to hold it up. If some reporter says that Big Ten schools can't be ready, don't include Michigan in that list because Michigan is ready to play. Michigan can play in 2 weeks from now. We will be ready to go. Don't even think about considering us as a team that could hold up this season. You want us to play. You tell us who, what, when, where, why. And I give Jim Harbaugh so much credit for that because if you think about it, you could actually make the case that Jim Harbaugh, maybe more than any other coach, has more to lose because of the fact that this is probably going to be the best Ohio State team since he actually got to Michigan. And Jim Harbaugh could easily say, like, yeah, I don't know, maybe we should push back to the spring, knowing that Justin Fields will be gone, that so many of Ohio State's stars will be gone. And instead, Jim Harbaugh said, tell us when and where. We want to play. Sign us up. Let's get to work. And so when I look at this whole situation, I give Jim Harbaugh a bunch of credit, and I will just say that I will be curious to see what the next steps are. It does not appear as though anything is imminent with the Big Ten. And I think what's increasingly likely is something that I talked about a little bit on the last episode, which is the possibility that we get potentially an early Big Ten season in October without the entire Big Ten. As I told you last week, Rutgers is in the hot spot of the country in New York, and they just might not feel ready to go. Greg Schiano, first-year head coach, maybe he wants another year to get his program in, to get his guys in place, and maybe it doesn't make sense for Rutgers to play. There's been reports that Illinois might not play. I don't really understand why Illinois. They were actually testing their players more than any school in the Big Ten at one point. Lovie Smith wanted to play. Northwestern, maybe another school, private school, they're one that has since removed students from campus. Maybe they don't play. And as I said a minute ago, Mark Schlissel, the president of Michigan, is saying, I don't really want my guys to play, and I'm even willing to hold them out if we can go in October. And so I bring all this up because I think it's increasingly likely that if we get a Big Ten season early, it's not going to include everybody. And by the way, I will say, if we got an October Big Ten season without Michigan, there's a 100% chance Mark Schlissel will lose his job because, you don't hold out Michigan when Ohio State, Penn State, and Wisconsin are playing. But I think that is what is increasingly likely. We may get a Big Ten season without all the Big Ten teams. But I also think there's a real possibility that we do not get Big Ten football as early as we want. I thought there was a few things interesting that happened last week. First of all, the fact that there's been no movement at all, to me, does not portend, if you will, to a good sign as far as the Big Ten coming back early. When the president of the United States gets on the phone and says, we got to get football back, and that doesn't grease the wheels, that doesn't get things going, to me, that's not a positive sign. And the other thing I would say, I thought there was a really interesting moment with Larry Scott, the commissioner of the Pac-12 last week, where he said, look, we want the Big Ten to be on the same schedule as us. We want the Big Ten champ and the Pac-12 champ to play in the Rose Bowl and maybe get a few other bowl games whenever we can get back on the field. And look, I think from the Pac-12's perspective, it makes total sense. The Pac-12, like I said, there are a lot of teams in that footprint that they're not going to be ready to play anytime soon, right? Like the Big Ten can reasonably play football as early October. The Pac-12 can't. As I said on last show, USC, UCLA, Stanford, Cal, not allowed in their facilities as of right now. Oregon, their players aren't even on campus right now because they're on the quarter system, and their actual fall quarter doesn't begin until the end of September. And so realistically, the Pac-12 cannot start in October. And so what I think they're trying to do is convince the Big Ten to wait with them until Thanksgiving and play late. The Pac-12, say what you want, but the worst thing that could happen, the perception is so bad as it is. Imagine if the 4 power conferences are playing by early October and the Pac-12 is the only one that can't. So I think they're really trying to pressure the Big Ten, and they're really trying to say to the Big Ten, like, look, we went to bat for you. We were by your side when you decided to cancel season. Now you got to throw us a bone. Now you got to wait. Either way, I think it'll be interesting. Either way, it continues to be as the Big Ten turns. But as I just said a minute ago, There is no new news since I last recorded on Thursday, but I do believe that it feels increasingly likely that if we do get a Big Ten season, that it will be without some teams. I do hope that Michigan is not one of them, because again, I give Jim Harbaugh just so much credit for being willing to go to bat and being willing to fight for his guys and say, like, look, we're going to be ready to go. You let us know when you need us on the field. We will be ready to play. We could be ready to play 2 weeks from now. I give him so much credit. I'll just be curious to see if that can actually hold up over the course of time.